Singapore launches National Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy. That's the headline, the Straits Times headline from 4 days ago, 6 October, where the government announced that there will be a new mental health office. It's a national mental health office that will be established by 2025. So where are we at now? What is the state of the mental health discussion? And of course, especially overseas, people have talked about mental health being an epidemic, especially amongst younger people, and some data even suggests that mental health amongst teens is at its lowest in recorded history. So we'll be discussing that with two very eminent and capable guests, Doctors Chua, Sook, Ning and Rayner, and I will be having them on, and they are from Singapore Mental Health Matters. So I am not an expert at all, so I will be hoping that they will be able to guide me on this. So welcome to episode 70 of Teh Tarik with Walid. So thank you so much for doing this. I don't know whether Rayner built on us.
Mr.
He
Rayner. He
It's
like the
okay.
finger behind already.
Okay. He just sent me a request. Okay, so maybe while we wait for him to come on, firstly, thank you for doing this. So, Dr. Chua, why Singapore Mental Health Matters? Oh, hi.
Why Singapore
Hi,
Oh,
Rayner. Oh, yes.
Hello.
Hello,
well,
hi.
I think Dr. Rayner, this question is best taken by you. Why Singapore mental health matters? I softball it back to you first. He's the lead, by the way, so we're all like,
Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me well? Is that
Yes.
all right?
Very
All
well.
right, perfect. So why SG Mental matters? Well, I mean, I think maybe we start from the beginning, of how it formed, right? I think so ex-NMP Anthea Ong, wanted to do work around like getting the public's input and citizens' input rather on like a mental health policy around like accessibility, affordability, quality. And, I think it started this movement of people with lived experiences who really wanted to volunteer and help out, to really like assess what's going on back then. So, this was born out of that initiative, and it has kind of grown since, like a lot of people, including myself, with lived experiences of mental health, with, addiction, some others with different types of lived experiences as well. I think we've all come together to, work on this as sort of like a citizen-led initiative, or like a community-led initiative rather.
Okay. Thank you. Anything you want to ask?
yeah, I mean, I think one of the important things that Rayner talked about was that this is a group of people with lived experiences. So it's not top down. We're not just looking at policies. We're not just looking at how things are done from the outside. A lot of us are directly impacted by the policies, and we kind of lived under that. And so we can, we have the insider experience, I think, to then be able to lead it further and give feedback on how things are affecting people on the ground.
Right. So between the two of you, I think you mentioned lived experiences 4 times. So why is it
buzzword, bro?
right? So I guess what I'm getting to is, do you feel that is extremely important to emphasize? Because why policies have been, especially in this sphere, have been disconnected from lived experiences, or?
Let me start with saying I think one of the important things about that is tackling stigma. Because people think individuals who had or have mental illness are incapable of being productive or participating. The stigma is they're lazy, they're crazy, they're nonsensical. And so I think it's not the badge of honor that we have to say, oh, lived experiences, but it's to also tackle the stigma that, people with these experiences have something valuable to contribute to the community. But yes, it can probably be overused. I feel like you called us out on that, like lived experiences.
No, I was just trying to clarify. Yeah, Dr. Tan, anything?
Oh, call me Rayner.
Oh, Rayner. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
I think I was smiling because I thought like something or Sook was going to like say something about what we talked about, in preparation for this talk, because like of course have to like prepare, right? But
Yeah.
like what are policies in the first place?
Mm-mm.
And I think I don't know. So do you have that definition with you that you want to say?
Yeah. Okay. So my mission is since joining SG Mental Health Matters, I'm often confronted with my ignorance. I first learned intersectionality here in this space, and it's quite jargony, right? Even like policies.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of just trying to wrap my head around it, and I've decided that policies are basically just decisions. Decisions that are taken by lawmakers, by the government, even by organizations that are in this area that can impact the community. So if we take out the sort of jargon out of it, and it's just like we're just looking at mental health decisions in Singapore and whether they are effectively achieving their intention, right? Because I think most decisions have good intentions.
Right.
And is it actually, achieving the goal that it's set out to do?
Right. But of course, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So we need good good intentions with good policies and good actions, right? It must be together, right?
Yeah.
So the next one is, are we okay? Hashtag are we okay? Public consultation. Do you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll wait for Rayner to come
Yeah.
back and talk about it.
I
'cause
think,
he
Rayner,
really
you may need to
yeah.
log off and come
He-
back on probably. Yeah.
He spearheaded it. I think one of the things that SG Mental Health Matters has done really well is wanting to bring these issues to the ground and ask people what are things that are impacting them, what are the important issues to them. I think often, policymakers or I guess anyone we're so high level, right? Even like for public health, and our even for Rayner and I, our experiences don't necessarily match the general public. And so I think these public consultations are really important to understand what is important to the community and to be able to reflect that, to the various stakeholders and to highlight these issues.
Right.
Sorry, I missed a little bit of it, but I hope this isn't repeating what Sook has already said. But I think like lived experiences match like what we're trying to get at. Whether are things effective. I think we have to really evaluate decisions and their intentions based on the outcomes that they're hoping to achieve. And I think a lot of the outcomes come from the communities themselves. I think that's like philosophically why we decided to do things like the public consultation. Like am I supposed to add a little bit more about like what our public consultations are like at this point in time?
No, we just said we asked people what their experiences are and how things are on the ground. That would be a quick summary.
Right.
And I think because I was saying that you and I think as much as we say we're not representative of the whole community, and so I think asking the community what matters, it's the important thing for us to then reflect it back to the stakeholders.
Yeah. So I just saw this article earlier today, right? Over 50% of Singaporeans feel that mental health issues are not discussed enough, right? At the same time, it's almost everywhere. Yeah.
It's everywhere.
It's almost everywhere, right? And
Right.
it's everywhere to the point that everybody who talks about it says it's not discussed enough. So and both can be true, right? It could be that it's everywhere, but it's really not discussed enough because we're just scratching the surface, or a lot of people are also saying it because now it's the in thing, it's sexy, and they're not delving deep into it and not trying to really understand it. Or what do you think? Is there a paradox here?
I think it can exist because like we can be talking a lot about it. It might be the same thing over and over again. It might be just scratching the surface. But maybe when we say we don't talk enough about it, we don't talk about like a lot deeper themes, right, around mental health and well-being. And also I think I think that might be the missing piece.
I I think there's a difference between a high level conversation and the ads that we see, like beyond the label. But then that doesn't mean you're able to or have people that you can discuss these issues with, right? So on some and that's one thing I worry about, Walid, that we are saturated with it. So to the
Right,
point that
right.
we think, oh, actually, there's no more stigma because it's everywhere.
Exactly.
But at the individual level, people are still. We know that there's the treatment gap. People are not feeling well. They are not getting help. They're not getting help early, and people have a really difficult time talking about it. I mean, the latest report shows that a lot of employers don't want to. Are reluctant to hire employees
Yeah.
who disclose mental health issues.
Yeah. I mean, I even anecdotally, I've known people who publicly talk about the importance of this, but when a family member of theirs go through this, then they are reluctant to accept. They would say that it's something else. I guess it's a bit of cognitive dissonance as well. So definitely, I mean, I share your concern about the saturation, making us complacent, thinking that this is actually, the stigma is not gone, when actually it's still highly stigmatized, right? There is a question here by Arun, who has done some work on the mental health or mental well-being of Indian men especially, and he actually talked about gender and ethnicity, and I was actually shocked, I think last year, when I saw the stats that and I think we will be talking about this later on, like Project Hayat. And the suicide rate for it differs very drastically across the races, and somehow Indian men were the highest. I mean, it was highest for Indian men, and I don't know whether there is any theory on that. Rayner, would you happen to? Do you want to speak to that, or the general point about gender and ethnicity, and how is this proportionate?
Right. No, okay, like I try not to make it too theoretical,
Okay.
but the two
Sure.
things
Yeah.
that I think there is one which is, minority stress, right? I think in general when there's someone who has a minority identity, would experience forms of stigma and discrimination that increase their vulnerability, right? To like mental health challenges. I think that's one thing. When you talk about, there's a lot of Sook race intersectionality. That's also one thing that's also quite jargony, but basically when you have multiple identities that are, stigmatized, or maybe you just occupy different identities, basically your experiences will be unique, and these unique experiences actually reflect broader, inequities that, at the structural level. So, I think those two things come up for me.
So that was my first instinct as well, right? But then the Malays are the lowest. The Malays are the lowest, and then is the Chinese, and then the Indians much higher. So if it's just the minority stress, then you should see Chinese lowest, and then Malays and Indians, right? So are there? As in, I'm trying to get at what is it specifically about
in
this?
Malaysia too.
Oh,
by
is
the
it?
way.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh,
it's the
interesting.
same.
Okay.
I feel like I have to confess, guys, I'm not fully Singaporean. I am Malaysian, no hate. I am Singapore PR. But okay.
Awkward.
Oh yeah.
Awkward.
But the thing is, we do see that that similar a discrepancy even in Malaysia. And so one of the things that people have raised is religiosity for the Malays. And that's a huge thing. And we also know that actually suicide is really high in India. So there's just something going on.
Right.
I think that Rayner is pointing out, so there's a minority stress, but there's also that cultural piece. I know that talking about mental health issues in the Indian culture is not always easy. There's also been highlighted a lot of substance abuse issues. There. So I think that there are multiple levels, and so it's hard to identify kind of one single thing.
Right.
But it in both countries, I think it says it tells us we really need to look at vulnerable communities. Instead of just always like broad strokes, right? Everyone, mental health matters to everyone, yes, but to some groups, mental
Right.
health is a real concern, and we have to put more resources into understanding what's going on.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah, I absolutely agree. More research, right? And also you mentioned the cultural factors as well. I mean, this is fascinating, right? This is, I mean, it's doubly sensitive, right? We are talking about mental health and then talking about zooming in into race and culture, right? But it needs to be done. It needs to be done. When I saw the data, I was a bit shocked. I didn't expect that. But thank you. So also just one thing, he also mentioned gender. It's generally true that men are more prone to men commit suicide more than women, right? But the attempted rates are the same between the genders, or
Tend to be higher but completed suicide. Sometimes the attempted suicide either equal or higher among women, but
I see.
completed suicide would
Right,
be higher among men because they generally tend to use more lethal methods.
right, okay.
Right.
So, so that shows that actually mental health issues affect men and women roughly the same. It's just that men,
Yeah, I mean
yeah, yeah.
overall, right? I mean,
Overall,
yeah,
is the same. Okay,
because
okay,
because
got it.
men and women both have mental health women.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So
Okay,
so
mental.
yeah.
Yes. So it's not as if the higher suicide rates for men shows that men are more prone to this, right? Uh,
Hmm.
Mm,
No,
mm,
I think
mm,
that I guess suicide is one indicator, right? And
yeah,
like I think there are multiple factors that
mm.
that lead to suicide related behaviors. I think at least that's what literature calls it. But I think basically you talk about like methods of suicide. You talk about like different things that lead to these situations that people find themselves in. And I think that doesn't mean that one group has poorer mental health. And I think Arun also pointed out that while Indians have higher levels of suicide that were reported, like I think Malays, have higher levels of poor mental health outcomes. So like
Mm.
there are all these nuances that I think we
Mm.
have to, take into account. But suicide is, in fact, I guess, a very strong indicator of
yeah,
something that's happening.
Right.
yeah,
There is also that sense of hopelessness, right? So
right,
like suicide, I mean, is the is the action that people tend to take because they don't see a viable alternative,
right,
right? So we're really thinking about groups that somehow they've reached that end that path where they go, there is no other option, and that's really worrisome.
right.
Why do they not see alternative routes to getting out of whatever they're facing and trying to work it through. So I think it kind of points to possibly the lack of support as
Right.
well, for certain communities.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So just one final one on this before we move on. So, in relation to what Rayner just said when he was reading out Arun's comment. So, how do we measure this? What are the indicators? Since you two are experts, right, of mental well-being, how exactly do we measure? Because I mean, it's not this when it involves human beings. It's not like something you can do in a lab, like very easily. It's replicable, right? But there will be scientific or more scientific measures. So what are the possible outcomes that we can use to ensure as scientifically as robust as possible the methodology to determine mental health outcomes?
Mm, mm. Hmm. I guess if I start from the national well-being, mental health well-being strategy, like it actually highlights that these are all the factors from the individual outwards, that affect mental well-being and mental health, right? And one thing that catches my eye that I always found missing in a lot of like policy or press releases, from MOH has been the idea of like social determinants of health. I think that's something that's sort of being introduced with like Healthier SG with this,
Right.
and I think that's where the question is actually. I think a few months ago, my friend was like, where do you find social determinants of health data? Then I was like, I
Mm.
actually don't really know.
Right.
So it's like this actually needs to be coordinated across like I guess a lot of different ministries might have things related to it. And I think that's where we would find that data we need to really paint a more nuanced picture.
So
Mhm.
such as what? What are these social determinants?
Like I guess things around like say, okay, if we think about structural issues like socioeconomic status,
Right.
things
Right.
like gender that were brought up, housing status,
Right.
whether you are living
Right.
in like a rental flat versus
Right.
things like that.
So it's really related to concrete material, or at least it's one aspect of it, right? The material well-being. Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I would say this, there are many ways to measure. So I think Rayner is talking about the factors that influence mental health,
Right.
and to measure mental health, Singapore has the National Mental Health Study that is run, and so they would use standardized diagnostic assessments to do that. But that's only for mental illness. And I
Right.
think what is important is to get away from just the illness aspect of mental health, and Rayner and I always try to emphasize that. That we don't want policies that focus only on like uh, looking at pathology, right? Looking at health and
Right.
just an illness lens. So the well-being measures are fairly simple. Actually, the easiest measure is there's something to the extent of, are you feeling happy? So of course that's state, that's a state level questionnaire. So you could say like, how happy were you this year? So, and if you want to get even more nuanced, then be like, let me get a bit geeky, and your audience could answer this question of, we have three psychological needs to feel agency, a sense of agency, and that you have your say in things and how things are going, to feel a sense of competency and effectiveness, and the last one is to feel a sense of connection, like mutual connection. And so if you can answer yes, yes, yes to all three, you're doing pretty good. If there's some sort of no in these areas, then probably your mental health on a whole is not, it's sort of either in the middle, or perhaps like doing pretty poor, and you can then look at how could you, not just on a health aspect, but how could you get the things that you need in your life to actually, live well.
What were the three? The third was connection.
So the first is the need for autonomy.
Okay, autonomy.
The second
Yeah.
is the need for competence. And the
Okay.
third is the need for relatedness. And guys, it's from self-determination theory, my favorite social psych theory.
Right. Okay.
But it's a really great theory that's been shown to be across generation, across cultures, that humans have these three basic needs. So that's I think a very useful way to thinking about well-being.
Right.
Because when our needs are met, then we can thrive, right? So we're not just looking at survival, we're actually looking at that mental health, or health, is not just the absence of illness, but
Right.
it's the presence of actual thriving.
Okay, thank you. I completely agree as well. I think even myself, when we think about mental health, the first thing we think about would be illness rather than well-being, right? I think there needs to be a shift there. So I wanted to ask, I don't know whether this is provocative or not. It seems to me that the pendulum has swung a little bit further than it should, right? When 15 years ago, nobody was talking about mental health, and that was the extreme. Now the pendulum has swung. Like, people are self-diagnosing. Everybody now, like, it seems like sometimes when I talk to younger people, there's a lack of distinction between being sad and being depressed, being anxious and having anxiety, and I see people self-diagnosing all the time. Do you think that's a fair assessment, or am I exaggerating? Be honest.
Yeah, be honest. Okay. It got actually very funny. It's like one psychologist, like I was trained in sociology, Walid, I think you're like political science, like very
Yes.
social science kind of like discussion here. Okay, so from a very structural sociologist point of view, I would just think through, actually I view a lot of these things. I mean, as someone who also advocates for lived experiences, like I think when someone says that they have anxiety, like to the extent of maybe saying that they maybe have like generalized anxiety disorder, even if it's not diagnosed yet, or maybe it's diagnosed, I feel like it's saying something that is actually reflecting what they're going through, right? And I think when these things happen, I ask myself, what is happening for this individual, and I think that's why it's so important, maybe for us not to focus too much on pathology and illness and diagnosis, because like these things that people say probably mean something, that we should dig deeper into.
Mm. So it's not so much as in the diagnosis is not as important as the process. The fact that they are saying it is already reflective of something, and we have to take it seriously.
It's a reflective
Yeah,
that they're
I guess my
experiencing
viewpoint.
something, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm a clinical psychologist, so I can't talk about the structural issues, but I think most people who come in to our clinic who say they're not feeling well, they're not feeling well. I've yet to find someone who says, I've been feeling low, and then we go like, oh, actually, everything's great. Because it's, there is we may not know why, but there's a gut feeling often that something's not quite right. I think the idea of labeling, that's an interesting point you're bringing up. Are we over labeling things? Um, I'll say kind of yellow sometimes, but I think it's a way for people to it's a heuristic that people are using to try to communicate to others there's something not quite right? And they're using it in some maybe the layman terms. They're saying anxiety, they're saying depression, but they don't necessarily mean clinical. I would say the only thing is don't Google everything. Like it can be detrimental
Right.
because everything's on a continuum, right? So
Right.
if you're not, but I tell people, because people ask me, how do you know if people are not faking it? I said, you don't know. And why would someone fake it usually for such a stigmatized, uh, for stigmatized illnesses like, the various mental illnesses. Rarely do people actually want to do it, and if they're faking ill, there is something wrong, right? There's something is going on, right?
Right.
Happy, healthy people
Yeah.
don't fake ill,
So
so either way, something's
yeah,
not
yeah.
quite right, and yeah.
Right. So you're definitely right. I think I agree with you that even if they're faking it, that shows that there's something wrong, right? But to just to push you a little, so I mean, you said why would they fake it, right? Or what's to begin? Well, there could be the idea of social acceptance if on social media it gives you, because I think social media
Yeah.
is a crucial part of this. That I think it's an extremely
Yeah.
important part, and I mean I am thankful. I think Rayner is a bit younger. So maybe he did grow up with social media a bit, but I'm just thankful that I didn't grow up with social media, because I know that it would have affected me in ways I cannot imagine.
Right.
So yeah, there could be some
Yeah.
sort of
But isn't that worrying, right? Like that all your friends are saying in order for me to be accepted, I have to be sad.
Yes.
I don't think you are healthy in that
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? And so they
Yeah,
have
yeah.
found, we are ironically on Instagram, that there are certain dark networks in Instagram because of the algorithm would then
Right.
promote to you certain accounts that can actually make your mental health worse. So if you
Yeah.
put anything about distress, then you start seeing more accounts that are mentioning that, and that has been shown to actually increase the rate of suicide. The same for eating disorders. I mean, that has been highlighted
Yeah.
in the U.S. Senate. So, I think perhaps people might be doing it for attention or for social acceptance, but that is to me also indicative that that this is a community around illness and not health, and there is something wrong if we all get together and says like, oh, my story of distress is worse than yours, and
Yeah.
my story of distress, and we don't know how to be accepted in a healthy way,
Right.
in a way that actually is promotive.
Okay. Thank you. I think that was useful. So okay, let's move on to the more policy part, right? So how do we track MP performance in issues like mental health? Because
Okay, bye.
so,
I checked out
you
really quick.
you were
Yeah,
going you're going for a
I was
great
like,
escape.
that's for Rayner, right?
Yeah. Let me
So,
answer.
So how do we do that? Because now also again, I think Anthea really opened the doors for this, right? I mean, and also she was the one who set this up, but she really opened the doors for this by discussing this in Parliament and so on. And it's very easy for people just to jump on that and just throw a bone here and then MP just mentioned mental health here, and then there's no follow up. So how do we actually measure and track the MP's performance?
Right. No, I guess it kind of speaks to what we're doing at actually Mental Health Matters with like our policy watch, right? If you go to our website, we did publish a report, for the last year, and basically every month, we had 2 reports because we're all volunteer run, so like we had to split it into 2 because we couldn't finish one big report in time.
Right.
But I think we what we do is track the parliamentary questions, on a monthly basis. We also go into like the debates around like the budget period, to look at when and how mental health is being raised in Parliament. And the reason why we do parliamentary questions and also like the debates around budget and things like adjournment motions and all that is because we feel that these reflect like what MPs might be reflecting off their own constituents, right? I think MPs, I guess in theory, will represent the needs of their own constituents, and so these questions being raised in Parliament will reflect that. I think that's how we track it on a month-to-month basis.
Right. So I'm looking at your website now. So for 2022, 277 PQs were asked about intersectional mental health issues. That's quite healthy, no?
I think quite healthy. So okay, if with this, let me explain what this intersectional mental health issues are. Okay, so like we did our volume 1, we did count everything that said explicit mental health. And I think it doesn't do service to it doesn't disservice to the issues around mental health because it is so intersectional. And how do we think through all these like search terms that around intersectional mental health PQs is because we did our public consultation, and our public consultation told us that okay, there are these vulnerable groups that you should look into, so we use those search terms. We also looked at things around, let's say, stress, suicide and all that. So like if we say 277 and then we exclude the supplementary questions because we just want to count maybe like the PQs themselves, out of 2515 total PQs asked in 2022, that means it's about like 8.4% of questions raised were around intersectional mental health issues. Is that good or bad? I don't think we have a real benchmark, but I think it tells us that it's being talked about in Parliament. But question for us to throw back to maybe the public is 8.4% enough?
But Rayner, like that's 8.4%, but we also found like only 59 questions were direct and explicit related to mental health. That's 2.3%, right? So we could kind of say like how many questions are really addressing mental health specifically. Then it's not that many, and we found that they tend to peak in certain months. One of it, which is October, the October month of mental health, because it's on mental health days, and I think that all of a sudden people are paying attention to it more. But we're not really going to get a healthy society if once a month, a month out of a year, we're like, oh yeah, mental health, right? Let's try to do everything then, and then we know that there is actually no consistent follow-up to these issues raised. There's perhaps less accountability, and then another year passes, and then people go, oh right, what about that issue? And so sometimes we actually found that some of the same questions are being asked repeatedly. And I think this report is trying to provide a record of what's being asked, and so that MPs and even the public can go, okay, where are we heading? Are we maturing in our discourse? Are we progressing in what we're understanding? So I think that's super important.
Right. So what can citizens do to move the needle?
Well,
Citizen?
citizen. Okay, citizen. I would, as a
What can
citizen, I
citizens
shall
or PRs do?
answer this. Okay. What can citizen and PRs do to move the needle? Well, I mean, I think I hear this a lot, but you're talking to your MP,
Right.
like I think one thing that you could do, because that's definitely something that brings to the forefront of one's like many competing priorities, around like the health, mental well-being, right? I think that's one thing. I think one thing that I feel that we kind of lack right now, like if we look at the strategy, we have identified certain vulnerable groups, right? Like youth, like pregnant mothers and so on. And these are actually, I guess, all because, we have a lot of data in those areas. But, if we have more data on, vulnerable groups, participate in things like, research and, to really like, maybe talk more about your experiences. I think that could also help us get more data on, like where should we focus on, in terms of vulnerable groups. It expands the discourse and the conversation around that.
I
Okay.
also pitch for that data point is to have open data. I'm a big fan of that because I think there is a lot of data, a lot of people who can analyze it, but if it's only in the hands of a few, actually, our knowledge isn't progressing as fast as it could. If more minds, right, could actually look at what's happening, and different people would then highlight different issues and help us to understand what's important for us to focus on. I would say, like, as an ignorant person, just like you can just raise the issue. Don't worry about how it's going to be solved. I think
Right. Exactly.
our job as the community members is just raise important issues. It was important to
Exactly.
you, important to your family, your friends, and keep raising these things because they are, as Rayner said, so many competing voices. So if you want to make a dent, right, you got to be consistent. You play the long game, but these are important issues to be resolved and to be addressed.
Oh, 100%. I never got it when people sometimes, policymakers will ask, "Oh, what's your solution?" It's not my job, it's your job, right? I think it's good if the citizen suggests a solution as well, but the onus is not on the citizen, right? And I should be a minister if you want me to solve nothing for you, right? But
Yeah,
yeah,
and like the citizens, our solutions don't take into account all the secret knowledge, right?
exactly,
That
right,
MPs have. So
exactly,
our
right,
solutions are going to be often going to be like a partial thing, and so
yeah,
our job is just, I think, raise problems, raise
right,
concerns. Don't worry so much about
right,
is there a
right.
working solution.
And if there's no demand, there won't be supply, right? And sometimes, as I think, as the two of you rightly pointed out, there are so many things that are on their minds as policy priorities. They would obviously champion the ones that people are most interested in. So if we don't tell them, then they would not know that it's a priority as well. So Project Hayat, the National Suicide Prevention Strategy work group, right? So I want to get to that, right? But I wanted to ask the two of you on this. I don't know whether you know Professor Jonathan Haidt. He's a psychologist based in the US. And he has a theory that maybe I don't know whether the two of you agree with, but I am quite attracted to the idea of how people today have become more fragile, right? Millennials and Gen Zs, partly because of overparenting. So partly, of course, social media. I think that's a huge one, but partly because of overparenting, and there are many reasons why people overparent and they are overprotective nowadays. But the biggest reason is structural because people have fewer children, therefore they're more protective. Do you think that is one of the root causes where we are protecting children so much at such an early age, such that any exposure to difficulties, they start to crumble? I mean, I've mentioned so many times before, everybody gets a gold medal. I am thoroughly against that. Sports day, everybody gets a gold medal.
Did
But
did you want
I
a gold
just
medal too, Walid? Is that why? It's
no.
like-
See, that's always the easy way out, right? That's the easy way to dismiss an important point. Oh, did you want to do that? Did you want to? And then you didn't get it right. When actually, wouldn't you say that that does something to? In fact, my son got a gold medal, and I told his school that that shouldn't happen, right? So it's the opposite of what you said. But wouldn't that be the a possible explanation for fragility? You think?
I mean, it's a great question. So
Oh.
I actually am quite opposed to people calling the new generation the strawberry generation, because I think it overlooks and dismisses that this generation each new generation is dealing with a lot more stress than the older generation, as you said, right? The social media, right? Like, and these are new challenges that we don't know how to help the younger generation cope with. So the idea of resilience actually came from out of the study of children who were exposed to really threatening circumstances, right? So you can think about orphanages, you can think about, impoverished circumstances, and some of these kids were able to develop within normal range. We're not thinking like like top A scorers that go to super. All schools are good schools, guys, but better schools, right? We're just thinking like normal development. And so we're really thinking that resiliency is are you able to cope from really difficult situations, not regular situations, right? So we have to understand that this younger generation, I think, you're faced with stresses that even I don't quite understand, and I sometimes I'm like, how do I help you? How do I equip you
Right.
to be able to handle the stress that I myself have never encountered at so young an age, at 10 years old, being exposed to so many voices, so many criticisms, everyone's eyes on you. And I can say, just ignore life, it's okay with. But they can't, so I think one of the things is, yes, maybe not fragility in so much as we're not doing a great job equipping our younger generation to face these stresses. And so the stresses are never ending, is every day. And I think we have to really kind of think of, instead of dismissing it as like, oh, this is a fragile generation, is think, okay, how do we help this generation face stresses that are so new, like even AI, right? And
So
I mean,
so how
there's
do
been
we do
like
that?
controversies for that. Well, I only raised the problem on it if I had the answer, I'll be MP. But I think, I think we have to look into it, because I mean, there was this incident of bullying where young women, AI, constructed images of them that they were supposed to be nude, were then spread around town, and they were
Yeah.
never nude. They were
Right.
these AI constructed images. So we've never encountered that level of stress before. So I don't want to say fragility, because I'm also aware of the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And so I think we can't see that generation as fragile.
Right. Rayner? Yeah.
Well, so thanks for covering all the clinical, theoretical, perspectives. Like I can speak from the perspective of a overprotected son, growing up, and I love my parents to bits, right? Like this is like I wouldn't say overprotected. I'm like overloved. I'm very privileged to have that. But I think one thing that, in spite of that, I also grew up with a lot of like challenges, right? Because there are so many things that happen, growing up, that parents don't know about. Increasingly, even for this generation, with more stuff that's going online,
Of course.
there's a
Of
whole
course.
different life that your children might have
Exactly.
that you
Yeah.
know nothing about. And I think right now, if we think about the solutions, it's also probably not just equipping parents with it, but equipping children and youth directly, with some of these skills. Therefore, the schools and like social, circles become super important. I think also in terms of like, I think we also probably need like youth voices involved, right? Into like, really like asking, what do they need, and what helps for them. in this whole equation. So I think maybe not giving parents too much credit for like shaping children. I think like society and even more so technology nowadays, like you mentioned, like playing a huge
Mm.
role in that whole equation. Yeah.
But the technology part we cannot really control, right? Like because the big tech
But
will
you
do
can
all.
equip. You can,
Right, right, right.
yes, you can
Exactly.
equip. I think the sort of literacy among the young is really important.
Right.
Um, I had a thought, and I'll be quick about that one because I don't
Yeah.
think giving medals actually improves self-esteem,
Yeah,
right? I
yeah.
mean, if it did, well, I mean, we would have all kids will feel so worthy and worthwhile about themselves,
Right.
and we know that that's not true. Um, it maybe actually is not doing much. Again, this is one of the good intentions thing, right?
Right.
What were all these medals trying to do? Was it
Right.
trying to help this child or help children feel good about themselves? And we know that isn't working. So yes, let's not give everyone medals if it's not working, but let's
Mm.
help everyone develop a healthy self-esteem.
Right.
I think that's a
Yeah,
positive
yeah. So
move.
so that's brilliant, right? So I'm always thinking like as a parent, where is that line, right? So because equip them you wanna equip them with enough self-esteem, uh, but you don't want them to be over validated, right? And you don't want to underpraise, you don't want to overpraise, and there's always that line where it's
Mm,
very difficult, so I always
mm,
am unaware of which side of the line that I'm
mhm,
on. So I mean, yeah, but I just thought that Jonathan Haidt's research was something that really
mhm,
spoke to me a bit.
mhm,
And I agree. I think it's really about equipping our children and youths and younger people with the right tools. But don't forget mental health